The ship fell from the sky like a dying bird, trailing fire and smoke across the Chilean desert. And Myra Okonkwo saw it happen from 30 kilometers away. She grabbed her radio and shouted for her crew to get the trucks moving, because they had maybe 2 hours before the military arrived and locked everything down. The year was 2247, and humanity had been dying slowly for almost a century, ever since the Velith hegemony arrived and decided that humans were not worth the effort of killing properly. They had simply wrapped a blockade around the solar system and left, confident that the primitive apes would starve themselves into extinction within a few generations. They had been mostly right. Earth's population had dropped from 9 billion to 2 billion as resources dwindled and hope faded. But some humans refused to accept their slow death sentence. Myra was one of them. She led a crew of scavengers who picked through ruins and crashed satellites looking for anything that could be repurposed or sold. And a genuine alien ship was the find of a lifetime. Her convoy reached the crash site as the sun was setting and the wreckage was still hot enough to make the air shimmer. The ship was smaller than she expected, maybe 40 meters long, and it had broken apart on impact into 3 main sections. Her engineer, a quiet man from Mumbai named Dev, was the first to notice something strange. "Captain," he called out, "this metal is wrong." Myra walked over and saw what he meant immediately. The hull was not uniform, and instead was a patchwork of different materials welded and bolted and fused together in ways that made no sense. One section was smooth black metal that seemed to drink in light, while another was covered in geometric patterns that glowed faintly blue, and a third looked almost organic, like it had been grown rather than built. "This is not a Velith ship," Dev said quietly. Myra felt her heart beating faster, because if the Velith were not the only aliens out there, then everything changed. They cut their way inside through a rupture in the hull and found the interior was just as strange as the exterior. Control panels with interfaces designed for hands that had too many fingers sat next to screens meant for eyes that saw different colors than humans could perceive. The crew moved carefully through the wreckage until they found what had once been the bridge. There was a body in the command chair, but it was not Velith. Velith were tall and gray with 4 arms and faces like angry insects, and everyone on Earth knew what they looked like from the broadcast they had sent during the conquest. This creature was different, smaller and covered in dark blue scales, with a face that might have been peaceful in death. "A pilot," Myra whispered. From somewhere else, Dev was already working on the ship's computer systems, his fingers flying over keyboards he had jury-rigged to interface with the alien technology. "There is still power in the secondary systems," he reported, "and I think I can access the navigation database." The screens flickered to life and displayed star charts that meant nothing to Myra until Dev overlaid them with human astronomical data. "Captain, look at this." The chart showed a region of space about 200 light-years from Earth, and it was marked with thousands of small icons. "What are those markers?" Myra asked. Dev pulled up more data, and his face went pale. "Ships," he said. "Thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands, all listed as derelict or destroyed." The database contained information about each marker, and as Dev scrolled through the entries, Myra began to understand what she was looking at. Each entry was a different species, a different civilization, and each one had been conquered and destroyed by the Velith hegemony over thousands of years. The Cathari, who had mastered plasma technology, Gondamundari, who had built shields that could stop anything, erased the Shavar, who communicated through harmonics and vibrations, silenced hundreds of species, hundreds of worlds, all reduced to entries in a database and wreckage floating in a cosmic graveyard. "They call it the Drift," Dev said, reading from the alien files. "And the Velith dump everything there after a conquest because They do not need it, and they do not want anyone else to have it. Myra stared at the screen and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. They do not innovate, she said slowly. They just take what they need and throw away the rest. Dev nodded, and his eyes were bright with the same realization. All that technology, all those weapons and shields and engines, just floating out there waiting to be claimed. A warning light flashed on one of the panels, and the ship's damaged computer spoke in a language none of them understood before switching to broken English. A Gemini patrol detected approaching the system. Recommend immediate departure. This unit will now transfer priority data to receiving devices. The screens went wild with streaming information, and Dev grabbed his tablet and held it against the alien interface. It is sending us everything, he shouted over the noise of the dying ship. Star charts and technology databases and something else. Something about other survivors. The ship gave one final shudder and went dark in the distance. Myra could hear helicopters approaching. We need to go, she ordered. Take everything you can carry. Her crew grabbed tablets and memory devices, and even chunks of the strange hybrid metal as they fled back to their trucks. They drove through the desert night with their headlights off, navigating by starlight and GPS, while military aircraft circled the crash site behind them. Dev sat in the back of Myra's truck, reading through the data they had stolen. There are others, he said finally. Other survivors from conquered species who have been hiding in the drift for centuries. And this pilot was one of them. Why did he come here? Myra asked. The database says he was looking for something, a species that might be different. One that might be able to do what his people could not. And what is that? Dev looked up from his tablet and met her eyes in the rearview mirror. Fight back. Myra drove in silence for a long time, thinking about what they had found. Velith had conquered hundreds of civilizations, and they had thrown away the weapons of every single one. Confident that no one would ever challenge them again, they had left humanity to die slowly because they did not consider humans a threat. They had made a mistake. Myra pulled out her radio and began making calls to people she trusted. People who had spent their whole lives preparing for a chance that might never come. We found something, she told each of them, and everything is about to change. Above her, the stars burned cold and distant. But for the first time in a century, they looked less like a prison ceiling and more like a map. The rust of dead civilizations was waiting out there in the dark, and humanity was going to claim it. 3 years had passed since the night in the desert, and Mira Okonkwo now stood on the bridge of a ship that should not exist. Vessel was called the Carrion King, and it was ugly in ways that made engineers weep. With a hull made from 7 different alien metals and engines that combined 3 different propulsion systems that were never meant to work together, but it flew and it fought. And it had carried Myra's crew through the Velith blockade 6 times now. They were approaching the drift. For the 7th time, entering the outer boundary, her navigator called out. A young woman from Brazil named Rosa, who had a gift for reading alien star charts. The view screen filled with the most beautiful and terrible sight in the galaxy. The drift stretched across 3 star systems. A vast nebula of purple and gold gases that hid a graveyard of impossible size ships floated everywhere. Some as small as fighters and others as large as cities. All of them dead and dark and waiting. I still cannot believe they just threw all this away, said Dev from his engineering station. The Velith do not think like we do, Mira replied. They see other species as resources to be used and discarded, not as equals who might teach them anything. She guided the Carrion King deeper into the drift, following paths they had mapped on previous runs. The graveyard was dangerous for many reasons, with unstable wrecks and radiation pockets and the occasional Velith patrol. But the greatest danger was something else entirely. Contact, Rosa announced. 3 ships approaching from bearing 275, Configuration unknown. Myra felt her stomach tighten because unknown meant Hollow the Hollow were what the survivors called themselves. The remnants of conquered species who had fled to the drift and hidden there for centuries. They did not trust newcomers, and they had good reason not to. Weapons ready, but do not fire unless I give the order. Mira commanded. The three ships emerged from behind a massive derelict cruiser, and Mira got her first clear look at them. Each one was different. Built from salvaged parts, just like her own vessel. But the designs were alien in ways that made her head hurt. One ship seemed to be made of crystal that pulsed within her light, while another looked like it had been grown from living coral. And the third was covered in mathematical symbols that shifted and changed even as she watched. They are hailing us, Rosa said. Put it through. The view screen flickered and showed three faces that were nothing like human. The first was a Shaver, one of the crystalline beings she had read about in the stolen database, with a face like a cluster of gems and a voice that resonated through the ship's hull. Human vessel, you return again to this place of the dead. Why do you persist when all others have learned to fear? Myra stood straight and spoke clearly. We persist because we have nothing left to lose, and because we believe there is still a chance to win. The second face appeared. A youth with biomechanical features that blended flesh and metal in ways that seemed painful. Many species have said such things before they were erased. What makes you different from the Kethari or the Mandari or any of the others whose bones float around us? We are different because we learn from everyone, Myra said. Look at my ship. Look at my crew. We took pieces from a dozen different civilizations and made them work together. The third face spoke. A Prath, whose features were hard to focus on because they seemed to exist partially in dimensions humans could not perceive. Your adaptation is noted, but adaptation alone does not defeat the hegemony. We have adapted for centuries, and we are still hiding like vermin in the dark. You have been hiding alone, Mira replied. Each species keeping to itself and hoarding what knowledge you have left. But we do not work that way. She gestured to her crew. Humans from every corner of Earth working together. Where I come from, we spent thousands of years fighting each other before we learned that cooperation was the only path to survival. And now we want to share that lesson with you. There was silence for a long moment then. The Shaver spoke again, and this time there was something different in its resonant voice. Something that might have been curiosity. You wish to form an alliance between species that have never trusted anyone. I wish to form an alliance between species that all want the same thing, Myra said. The end of the Velith hegemony. And why should we believe you will not betray us as soon as it benefits you? Myra smiled without humor, because unlike the Velith, we remember what it is like to be weak. We remember what it is like to be dismissed and abandoned. And we would never do to another species what was done to us. The three hollow ships hung motionless in space for what felt like hours. Then, the crystal ship moved aside and revealed a path through the wreckage. Follow us, human. There are others who will want to hear what you have to say. Mira ordered Rosa to follow, and the Carrion King moved deeper into the drift than any human vessel had gone before. Passed through fields of debris that told silent stories of ancient battles. Past ships whose designs hinted at technologies humanity had never imagined. Through clouds of dust that had once been living worlds. Finally, they reached a hollow at the center of the graveyard. A cleared space where dozens of ships floated around a structure built from welded-together hulls. We call it Haven. The Shaver transmitted. It is the last refuge of the hollow, and you are the first outsiders to see it in 300 years. Myra looked at the ramshackle station and the desperate fleet that protected it. These were the survivors of galactic genocide, the last children of murdered worlds. And they had been waiting in the dark for someone to give them hope. Thank you for trusting us, she said. Do not thank us yet, human. Trust must be earned, but you have done something today that we thought impossible. What is that? You have made us curious about tomorrow. The Carrion King docked with Haven and Mira, prepared to meet the leaders of the Hollow. She knew that convincing them would be the hardest thing she had ever done. But she also knew that if she succeeded, then the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had come to the graveyard of dead civilizations, not to mourn, but to build. And they would build something the Velith had never imagined. The shipyard floated in the shadow of a dead gas giant, hidden from Velith sensors by the planet's radiation belt and the wreckage of 1,000 ancient vessels. Myra walked through the construction bays and watched the impossible happen. A human engineer from Lagos was arguing with a Shaver crystal singer about the harmonic frequency of a shield generator. And somehow they were both understanding each other perfectly. A team of Yith bioengineers was teaching a group of mechanics from Seoul how to grow replacement parts for damaged engines. And the humans were learning faster than anyone had expected. A Preth mathematician was sketching equations in the air while a physicist from Moscow translated them into something human minds could grasp. This was what the Alliance had become in the 18 months since Haven. A fusion of species and knowledge, and desperate hope that was building something new from the ruins of the old. The fifth ship is almost complete, Dev reported as he fell into step beside Mira. And it is the strangest one yet. They stopped at a viewing window and looked out at the vessel taking shape in the construction. Cradle it was beautiful and terrifying. A ship that seemed to shift and change, even as they watched. The hull was made of Shaver crystal grown over a framework of Mondari metal, with Yith biological systems handling life support and Preth calculation engines managing navigation. And at the heart of it was a human command center, designed to let a crew coordinate all these alien systems through sheer adaptability. The Velith have never seen anything like this, Mira said quietly. The Velith have never imagined anything like this, Dev replied. They think in straight lines because they have never needed to think any other way. That was the secret the Alliance had discovered. The weakness at the heart of the hegemony. The Velith were not stupid, far from it. But they were predictable for 4,000 years. They had conquered the galaxy using the same methods and the same technologies and the same tactics. Because those methods had never failed. Every species they encountered had fought back in logical ways, and every logical defense had been overcome. But humans did not think logically. Or, rather, they thought in so many different kinds of logic that no single pattern could predict thema. Shaver crystal singer named Vethre had explained it best during a strategy meeting. Your species is chaos given form. It had said, you contain multitudes that contradict each other and yet somehow function together. It is maddening and beautiful and exactly what we need. Myra smiled at the memory, and then her smile faded as an alarm began to sound. All senior staff to the command center immediately. She ran through the corridors of the shipyard, past crews of humans and Hollow working side by side, until she reached the central hub where the Alliance leadership had gathered. The main screen showed a Velith fleet, 30 ships in perfect formation, moving through a system 2 jumps away. How did they find us? Demanded Crixfer, the Yith representative who served as military coordinator. They did not find us, replied the Preth known as 17. They are not coming here. They are investigating something else. The screen zoomed in and showed what the Velith were approaching. It was a convoy of civilian ships, refugees from an enslaved species trying to escape to the drift. They will be destroyed within hours, Rosa said quietly. Myra looked around the room at the faces of her allies, human and alien alike, and saw the same thought in all their eyes. We are not ready, Crixfer said. Our fleet is only 8 ships, and we have never fought together in actual combat. If we do nothing, then 3,000 people die, Mira replied. And if we fight and lose, then the Velith will know we exist, and they will hunt us down, and the Alliance will end before it truly begins. It was a valid argument, and Mira knew it, but she also knew that some things mattered more than strategy. The alliance was built on a promise. She said, "We promised that we would not stand by while the innocent suffer, that we would not become what we are fighting against." She pointed at the screen where the refugee convoy was trying desperately to outrun the approaching warships. Those are people who believed in the same hope we did, who risked everything for a chance at freedom. And if we abandon them now, then we do not deserve to win. Vethrai's crystal form pulsed with complex harmonics. The human speaks wisdom that my people once knew and forgot. We became so focused on survival that we lost sight of why survival mattered. Krixver's biomechanical face shifted in what might have been a grimace. "Very well. But if we do this, then we must do it correctly. No half measures and no retreat." 17's mathematical projections filled the air above the table. "I calculate a 63% chance of victory if we utilize the following approach." The plan came together in minutes. Each species contributing what they knew best. The humans would command and coordinate, adapting in real time to whatever the Velith did. The Shaver would use their harmonic technology to disrupt enemy communications. They Yith would launch boarding parties that could literally grow through enemy hulls. The Preth would calculate probability cascades to maximize the impact of every shot. It was insane and desperate, and it might just work. Mira took her place on the bridge of the Carrion King, now upgraded with holo technology until it barely resembled a ship she had first built. "All ships report ready," Rosa announced. "Then let us go save some lives." The 8 ships of the Alliance fleet jumped to battle. They emerged from hyperspace between the Velith warships and the refugee convoy. And for one perfect moment, Myra saw the enemy formation hesitate. The Velith had never encountered ships like these, had never seen this configuration of technologies, had never faced an opponent they could not immediately categorize. That hesitation lasted 3 seconds. It was enough. "All ships engage," Myra commanded. And the graveyard rose up to fight. The battle was chaos in the most literal sense. A swirling mess of ships and weapons that followed no pattern the Velith had ever seen. Human captains gave orders that made no military sense till suddenly they did. Shover harmonics turned the Velith's own communications into weapons that scrambled targeting systems. See if boarding parties attached to enemy hulls and began consuming them from within. Prith calculations let damaged Alliance ships position themselves to deal maximum harm. Even as they died 4 hours later, it was over. The Alliance had lost 2 ships and 112 lives. The Velith had lost 27 ships and every soul aboard them, and 3,000 refugees were safe. Myra sat in her command chair and looked at the wreckage floating around her. They had won. But more importantly, they had proven something. The Velith could be beaten and word would spread. She opened a channel to the refugee convoy and spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy. "You are free now, and you are not alone. There is an alliance rising in the drift, and we will not stop until everyone is free." The Forge had produced its first weapons. Now it was time to build an army. The Kelith Passage was a strategic choke point that controlled access to 12 enslaved star systems. And Admiral Chun Wei Lin had studied it for 6 months before concluding that attacking it was suicide. Then he had spent another 6 months figuring out how to commit suicide effectively. 32 ships against 200. His first officer muttered as the Alliance fleet approached the passage. "The historians will either call us geniuses or idiots. Perhaps both," Chun replied calmly. Many great victories started with terrible odds. He had learned that lesson from Earth's history, from battles like Thermopylae and Agincourt and Midway, from moments when determination and cunning had overcome superior numbers. The Velith had never faced an enemy with that kind of history. Behind his fleet was ships crewed by every species in the Alliance. Humans and Shavar and Yith and Preth and a dozen others who had joined in the year since. The refugee convoy rescue word had spread as Myra promised it would. Every slave who heard whispers of the Drift Alliance felt hope stir in their chest. And some of them found ways to escape and join the cause. The fleet that approached Keleth Passage was small, but it represented something the galaxy had not seen in millennia. A united force fighting not for conquest but for liberation. Veleth fleet is responding to our approach. The sensor officer reported. They are forming a standard defensive formation. Chun smiled slightly because standard was exactly what he wanted. The Veleth Inquisitor Kethros commanded the garrison, and by all reports, he was brilliant and ruthless. But even brilliant minds could be trapped by patterns. Kethros had spent centuries crushing rebellions, and he had developed methods that always worked. He would try to use those methods now. Begin Phase 1. Chun ordered the Alliance fleet scattered in what looked like panic. Ships breaking formation and fleeing in different directions. Any competent commander would recognize this as a trick. And Kethros was more than competent. He ordered his fleet to hold position rather than pursue. But that was the first layer of the trick. As the Alliance ships scattered, they released thousands of small drones that had been built from salvaged Mundari technology. And each drone began broadcasting false sensor signatures. Within minutes, the Veleth were seeing 500 enemy ships. Instead of 32, Kethros would know that most of these were decoys, but he could not know which ones. Phase 2. Chun commanded 20 Alliance ships suddenly changed course and dove straight toward the heart of the Veleth formation in a suicide charge. Any sane commander would recognize this as a distraction, and Kethros was very sane. He sent 40 ships to intercept the charge while keeping his main force in reserve. That was when the real attack began. Remaining 12 Alliance ships had been hanging back, apparently damaged or hesitant, but now they activated experimental drives built from Shavar and Preth technology working in combination. They did not fly toward the enemy. They simply appeared in the middle of the Veleth formation, materializing from one point in space to another without crossing the distance between. The Veleth had no defense against weapons they did not know existed. 12 ships opened fire from point-blank range, and in the first 30 seconds, they destroyed 18 Veleth vessels before the enemy even understood what was happening. Chaos erupted. Kethros tried to restore order, but his communications were being scrambled by Shavar harmonics, and his targeting systems were being fed false data by Preth probability manipulations. The 20 ships that had appeared to be suicide charging suddenly split apart, revealing that each one was actually 3 smaller ships locked together, and 60 attack craft swarmed through the confused Veleth fleet. Eth boarding parties launched toward enemy vessels and attached to their hulls like parasites, beginning the slow, terrible process of consuming their way inside. They are adapting. The sensor officer warned. The Veleth are starting to compensate for our tactics. Then we changed tactics. Chun replied. He opened a channel to all Alliance ships. Execute protocol chaos. Every captain is free to engage as they see fit. No coordinated movements. No patterns. Show them what happens when you fight an enemy that makes it up as they go. What followed could not be called a battle in any traditional sense. It was anarchy with weapons. Human captains fought with centuries of military tradition behind them, drawing on strategies from every war their species had ever fought. One captain recreated Hannibal's double envelopment from the Battle of Cannia. Another used tactics from the Pacific Island hopping campaign. A third applied lessons from guerrilla warfare in the mountains of Afghanistan. Each approach was different, and the Veleth could not predict any of them. Ships that appeared to be retreating were actually luring enemies into ambush vessels that seemed to be dead suddenly came back to life and rammed their attackers. Damaged craft positioned themselves to explode at maximum effect when they finally died. Hours Past in fire and blood and screaming Metalchun watched his fleet being slowly destroyed, and he watched the Veleth fleet being destroyed faster. Admiral, his first officer said quietly, "We have lost 19 ships, and they have lost 84. Chun replied, "Continue the attack." In the heart of the Veleth formation, Inquisitor Kethros stared at his tactical display in disbelief. He had crushed 300 rebellions in his career, and not once had he seen anything like this. The Alliance fought wrong. They died wrong, and somehow they kept winning wrong for the first time in 400 years. Kethros felt something cold crawling up his spine. It was fear. Signal the fleet to withdraw. He ordered his officers stared at him in shock because Veleth did not retreat. Veleth did not show weakness. Veleth did not admit that an enemy might be their equal. "Sir, the passage will fall if we leave." "The passage has already fallen," Kethros replied. "If we stay and die here, then no one will warn the hegemony about what we face." He looked at the screens, showing the strange hybrid ships that were tearing his fleet apart. "These are not rebels. These are not slaves fighting for freedom. This is something new, and the High Conclave must know." The surviving Veleth ships broke formation and fled. Chin let them go as the last enemy vessel disappeared into hyperspace. He slumped back in his chair and allowed himself to feel the weight of what they had accomplished. 19 ships lost. Over 2,000 lives sacrificed. But the Keleth passage belonged to the Alliance now. More importantly, the Veleth knew they could lose. Chin opened a channel to the 12 enslaved systems beyond the passage and spoke words that would ignite a rebellion. Across the galaxy, the chains are broken. The passage is open, and the rust rises. Within hours, those words had spread to every slave in Veleth space. Within days, the first uprisings began. The Berustanujings began. Ember had caught fire. 18 months after Keleth passage, the Alliance fleet hung in orbit above Keth Prime, the homeworld of the Veleth hegemony. And Mira Okanko looked down at a planet that had ruled the galaxy for 4,000 years. 300 ships surrounded her. Vessels from 100 different species, all working together. All fighting for the same impossible dream. They had won. The rebellion had spread like fire through dry grass, with slave populations rising up on world after world, while the Alliance provided weapons and training, and most importantly, Hope the Veleth had tried to crush it with their usual methods, and their usual methods had failed. They could not predict an enemy that changed tactics with every battle, that drew on the military traditions of countless conquered species, that refused to fight by any rules the hegemony understood. Now the war was over. Or at least it could be. "The Veleth High Conclave is hailing us," Rosa announced. Mira nodded and straightened her uniform, such as it was. A practical jumpsuit decorated with patches from every species in the Alliance. Put them through. The screen filled with images of the 12 counselors who ruled the hegemony. Ancient Veleth, whose gray faces showed something their species rarely displayed: uncertainty. "You have proven yourselves formidable enemies," the eldest counselor said, "and we are prepared to discuss terms of surrender." Mira shook her head. "We are not here to accept your surrender." The counselors shifted in confusion, and Mira caught a glimpse of Kethros standing behind them, his eyes burning with hatred. "You have won," the eldest said slowly. "What else would you want if not our submission?" "We want to end this," Myra replied. "Not just this war, but the pattern that has defined your civilization for millennia." She stepped forward until she was closer to the screen. "You have conquered hundreds of species and destroyed countless civilizations because you believed that strength was the only thing that mattered, that the powerful had the right to do whatever they wished to the weak. That is the nature of existence." Kethros interrupted. "The strong survive and the weak are consumed. It has always been so, and look where it has brought you." Mira gestured, and the screen split to show images from across the former hegemony. Burning cities and shattered fleets and Veleth citizens huddling in fear. "Your empire is crumbling," because you made enemies of everyone and allies of no one. You threw away the knowledge and potential of every species. You conquered, and now those ghosts have risen to pull you down. She paused to let that sink in. We could destroy you. We have the strength, and frankly, many of our allies have the motivation. Your species has caused more suffering than we can calculate, and there are those who believe the galaxy would be better off without you. The counselors sat frozen, and Myra knew they were waiting for the killing blow. She did not deliver it, but we did not build this alliance to become what you were. We did not fight and die and sacrifice everything just to replace one empire with another. Then what do you want? The eldest counselor asked. We want peace. Real peace. A galaxy where no single species dominates all the others. Where strength is used to protect rather than conquer. Where the diversity that you tried to destroy becomes our greatest asset. She spread her hands. We are offering you a place in that galaxy. Not as rulers, but as partners. Not as masters, but as equals. Kethros stepped forward. His face twisted with rage. You offer us humiliation. You ask us to surrender our rightful place in the order of things. I offer you survival. Myra replied calmly. And more than that, I offer you a chance to become something better than what you have been. She looked past him to the counselors. You have spent 4,000 years taking from other species, but you have never learned from them. You conquered the Cathari and threw away their plasma technology instead of understanding why they developed it. You destroyed the Shavar without ever appreciating the beauty of their harmonic mathematics. Her voice softened. There's a whole galaxy of wonders out there. Things that your ancestors never imagined, and you have been too busy conquering to notice any of it. The eldest counselor was silent for a long moment, then slowly, painfully, the ancient Veleth nodded. We accept your terms human. Though it shames me to say it, there is no shame in choosing peace, Myra said. There is only shame in causing unnecessary suffering. The negotiations took 3 months, but in the end, the galaxy emerged. Transformed, the hegemony was dissolved, and in its place rose a galactic council where every species had a voice. The drift was declared a memorial, a monument to all the civilizations that had been destroyed, and teams from every world worked together to preserve and study what remained. Humans did not become rulers of the new order. They did not want to be, but they became something else. They became bridges when the Shavar and the youth could not understand each other's perspectives. Humans translated when old hatreds between formerly enslaved species threatened to erupt into violence. Humans mediated when no one else could see a solution to an impossible problem. Humans somehow found one on the first anniversary of the peace. Mira returned to the drift. A memorial platform had been built there, floating among the wreckage of dead civilizations. And representatives from every species in the alliance had gathered to pay tribute. Mira stood before them and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small container holding rust-colored dust, fragments from the ship that had crashed in the Atacama Desert so many years ago. This is where it all began, she said. A dying pilot from a conquered species came to Earth looking for help, and we answered. She opened the container and let the dust drift into space, mixing with the debris of 100 dead worlds. We did not win this war with our own weapons. We won it with yours, the technology of the Cathari, the shields of the Mundari, the harmonics of the Shavar, the biology of the Yith, the mathematics of the Preth. She looked out at the gathered representatives, and faces human and alien alike. Every species that the Veleth destroyed contributed to their defeat. Every civilization they erased became a weapon against them. In the end, they were brought down by the very ghost they created. Mira turned to face the field of wreckage that stretched to the horizon. We will never forget you, she said to the silent ships. We will never stop honoring your sacrifice. The rusted remains of your worlds forged our triumph, and we will spend eternity making sure it was worth it. She fell silent, and for a moment the only sound was the hum of the memorial platform systems. Then the shaver began to sing, a harmonic that resonated through the hulls of every ship present. A song of mourning and celebration and hope. Other species joined in, each in their own way. The Yith released spores that bloomed into brief, beautiful flowers. Preth projected equations that described the mathematics of loss and renewal. Humans simply stood together, holding hands, crying without shame. They had built a new galaxy from the ashes of the old, and they would make sure it lasted. As Myra looked up at the stars, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a dying Earth to a universe of infinite possibility. The Velith had been wrong about everything. The strong did not survive by consuming the weak. The strong survived by lifting everyone up together, and humanity. The species that had been dismissed as too primitive to bother killing had taught the galaxy that lesson. The rust had risen, and it would never fall again.